Carl at HDZero is constantly pushing the envelope of how small he can make his HDZero system. Recently, he introduced the Eco VTX, which was the smallest and lightest option for HDZero to date. However, now we have something even smaller when it comes to whoop use, the HDZero AIO 5. This is an all-in-one AIO for whoop use that has HDZero built in. Now, today we're going to take a look at this board. I'm going to walk you over its features. I'm going to talk about some of its capabilities, and then at the end, I'm going to share with you my thoughts. Now, just to be crystal clear before we get into it, I just want to say Carl at HDZero did send me this board over for free. Although he has not seen this video, he's not paid me to make this video, and as always, my thoughts are entirely my own. Okay, so to start, now size-wise, this board is 28.5 by 28.5, and it comes with 25.5 by 25.5 mounting patterns. If you just look at the holes on the side, they're not fully circular all the way around. They've saved space by simply just cutting off the unneeded parts of the PCB. Now, weight-wise, this board comes in at 5.7 grams without the motor plugs, or HDZero say 6.3 grams with motor plugs installed. Now, what's incredible about this board is just the amount there is going on. This has to be the most compact, the most populated AIO that I've seen on the market. On this side, we have predominantly flight control, receiver, and ESC, and on the other side, we have HDZero. Now, looking over everything and going over the specs one at a time, if we take a look at the main flight controller SoC first of all, the MCU, it's an STM32F411. That comes running Betaflight, pretty much standard today. Over here, we have an SX1280 chipset. If I just adjust the light so you can see it there. Oh, we're upside down. Let's just find it. There it is. SX1280, and that is because this board has a built-in Express LRS receiver. Now, it is SPI based, so that means it is going to be updated with the versions of Betaflight. On this side of the board over here, there is an integrated wire antenna. It's currently just folded along the top of the board. That solders in down there, and then that goes in to our Express LRS receiver based on 2.4 gigs. Now, looking around the rest of this side of the board, we have our gyro, which is a BMI 270. There is an onboard BEC on this board as well, which supports 5 volt up to 1 amp. Although really, there's nothing you're going to need to attach to that because everything is on this board. And then looking around the rest of the board, you will see our MCUs for our ESC. If I just spin them round, they are the BB21s. You can just see it down there. They are 8-bit MCUs. So this ESC will come pre-flash supporting either BL Heli S or Blue Jay. So that means you can choose what options you want with regards to the firmware and what features you have. But that does mean it will support things such as D-Shot 600. Now, with regards to that ESC, it supports 5 amp continuous and 6 amp peak for up to 3 seconds. If you just look around the board, you can see we've got the MCUs and then the FETs located around there. Now, just looking around the rest of this side of the board, you can see we've got a micro USB connector for updating the firmware and our connectivity. Then you can see we've got pads that run around the side for our ESC. You can see there, and there. There are no connectors installed as standard, but you could add the connectors if you wanted to. Now, flipping this board over to the other side, here we have the rest of the ESC as well as the HDZero side of the board. So up here, you can see we have our DM5680T chipset there. We have the DM6300 chipset there. We have a UFL connector there for our HDZero antenna. And then down here, you have the chipset for the camera input from TechPoint. Now, it's worth noting, you will see no MIPI connector on this board, and that is because this supports the analog HD cameras that HDZero have released. Just like their new Eco VTX, this supports the analog cameras, but not only does it support the standard camera that they released, there's a new Lux camera available as well, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute. Now, power-wise, the HDZero system on this supports 25 and 200 milliwatts of output and supports all the usual channels, which is R1 to R8, F2, F4, L1 and L8. And that is the same as you find on pretty much all of the other units. Now, the board itself, as I've said, is really compact, really well designed. Looking around, there isn't a lot of external connections. You've got your UFL for the HDZero, you've got your firmware update port there for HDZero, and then you've got your motor pads, and then you've got the rest of the I/O for your flight controller around the side. Now, the guys over at HDZero have put a lot of work and time into making sure that this board is reliable. You'll see just from the thickness of the board that it is thicker than we've seen on some of the others in the past. You've got fully wired and castellated pads as well all the way around. This board actually is a 14-layer PCB. It's incredible the work that they've had to put in to get all of this on board. I do know Carlos spent a lot of time testing this board to make sure that it does deliver with regards to not only the HDZero performance, but the flight control element as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that HDZero have done to try and make this board as strong as possible is increase the thickness. Now, if I just put it next to HDZero's Eco VTX, this is their latest Whoop style VTX. You can see the sheer difference in the thicknesses between the PCBs. If I just put them side by side there, you can see there is a huge difference between them. Not only is it thicker, they have those castellated pads on there as well all the way around. And that's just going to offer a lot more strength in the event of a crash than we had on the previous boards. Now, what's incredibly impressive about this new AIO 5 is the fact that it weighs just 1.2 grams more than HDZero's Eco VTX that they released a little while ago. This was their best, lightest option that they had before, and now for just 1.2 grams more, you're getting a full AIO. Now, this board may not be as light as some of the other AIOs you see out there for Whoops. Yes, I have seen them down below 4 grams, but none of them have a digital VTX built in for that. And this 5.7 grams for a full HDZero ready digital VTX Express LRS on board simply blows everything else out the water. Now, when it comes to camera choice on these boards, there are now two. As these boards don't have the MIPI connector, we have to use the HDZero new cameras which support analog HD. We have the Eco camera, which launched with the Eco board, and we now have a new Lux camera. Now, this Eco camera is incredibly small. It weighs just 1.8 grams. It is made by Runcam. It has a 1/3-inch sensor. It supports 720p 60 frames a second in 4:3. There is no 16:9 mode in this camera. It has a rolling shutter, voltage input range of 3.3 to 5 volts. And as I've said already, it weighs just 1.8 grams with the cable. Now, what's really interesting about these cameras is the fact that they are analog HD. I'm actually going to do a separate video on this, but what it means is HDZero have been able to get rid of that large and heavy MIPI connector and use the analog HD output. There really is very little downsides to doing this because it is still 720p. It's a short length of the signal, so using an analog HD signal really doesn't bring any downsides. In fact, I think it brings quite a few benefits in weight. It's a very clever way of cutting the weight down on the VTXs and the cameras with really very little penalty. Now, alongside the Eco camera, HDZero have introduced the Lux camera. Again, still analog HD and designed to be used with the Eco as well as the AIO boards, but this one has a larger sensor at 1/2 inch, supports 720p 60, but this time it supports 4:3 and 16:9. Still has a rolling shutter. It does weigh a little bit more than the last camera at 2.3 grams, and this is basically a smaller version of the Nano version 3 camera, which is said to be the best camera available for HDZero today. Okay, now just to give you a quick overview of this powered up and walk you through the settings and the options that are available. Now, currently you're seeing the OSD as it comes from the factory. It is pre-configured for the Mob 6, but you can change this if you want to. Now, with regards to the options, it works exactly the same as separate components. So we have our Betaflight menu, our HDZero VTX menu, as well as our camera menu. Just before we get into it, this camera you're seeing here is the Lux camera. Please do ignore the flickering that you're seeing on the screen. This is as a result of the difference in refresh rates on the mains electric here in the UK at 50 Hz versus the camera being at 60. Now, To enter Betaflight menu, it is exactly the same as it usually is. I'm not going to waste any time going through the options here, but you still have the usual Betaflight menu if you want it. That's available via the usual stick command. We then have the VTX menu. This gives us all of the main configurations for the HDZero VTX element. So we have our channel option, our power option, so 25 or 200 milliwatts, our low power mode, our pit mode, our offsets, our team race, our shortcuts, and then we have the exit screen. And then we have our camera menu if you want that as well. That is available. You enter that with the usual camera stick command. This then gives us the options for exposure. So we've got our normal brightness, our highlights, our low light brightness, as well as our main gain settings. We've got our image settings, and here you've got your contrast, your saturation, your color preference, your gains. You also, under this menu, have your flip, so you can turn your camera upside down if you want to, if you've mounted it wrong, and you've got your mirror options here as well. Then we have the video output screen. This allows us to change the aspect ratio, so this is where we set our 4:3 or our 16:9 if we want it as well, and you can apply that there. And then we have our language settings, our reset, as well as our save and exit. Now, something to note in my testing of this board on the bench is that it does get very hot in normal use. It even, though, gets hot when on USB. Now, obviously, on this side of the board, you have the flight control, and on this side, we have our HDZero side. I am noticing, though, that even on USB, there is a lot of heat being generated from this side of the PCB. What is interesting is that it doesn't seem to connect to the goggles when on USB, but there definitely is a lot of heat on this area and this area of the board. So what we're going to do next is get it under the thermal camera and take a look at what is going on. Okay, now just to demonstrate this under the thermal camera and also give you an idea of some of the temps going on here, I'm going to plug this in on USB first. This is the HDZero side of the board. We'll take a look at the flight control side of the board in a minute. What I'm going to do is very carefully one-handed plug it in. You can now see on this side of the board, we have components that are getting hot really quickly. There is that component down there that is getting hot. That, I believe, there is the RF power amplifier for the HDZero system. I think that's the RF power amplifier. We'll have to have a look in a minute under the microscope. But that is definitely showing some heat as well. Let me just turn on the center temperature so we can then have a look at what that's getting to. That is getting to 58 degrees. We've got 94 degrees on that component down there. And then if we look up on the rest of this side of the board, that IC there is definitely generating a little bit of heat. And there's a little bit of heat on there, but it's predominantly that component there on this side of the board that is driving that temperature increase. If we now just flip it over, just so you can see this side of the board, the flight control side, obviously we've got our STM32 there. That's running at 57 degrees. You can actually see all the heat is up this side of the board, and that is because it is the opposite side to where that component is that is getting very, very hot on the PCB. Let's just flip it back. But yeah, on USB, you can see there, it's that component that really is driving quite a lot of heat into the board. Now, to demonstrate this on battery, we're going to plug in. It's going to be quite hard for me to do this one-handed, but we'll give it a go anyways. Let me just pop that in there. There we go. So now we've powered it up on battery. What's interesting is there is a different IC that is getting hot now. That IC we saw earlier that was getting very, very hot isn't now. It's fully powered up, so we can see the HDZero system there is producing some heat. What I believe to be the power amplifier is producing heat. That is always one of the components on HDZero that does. And then we've got some temperature over here on the other DiviMath chipset. You can see that there is a difference in behavior between what gets hot when on USB and what gets hot when in normal use. If I now just rotate it over to the flight control side, now you can see that regulator there is getting hot on this board. Again, that's a different component to what it was earlier. Let's just get the focus on the camera right. Overall, you can see that there is quite a lot of heat in this board, so it is definitely going to need plenty of airflow. Now, the device that was causing that heat on USB is this little diode here. I thought at first it was one of these ICs, but they're FETs. It isn't, having spent some time looking more. It is this little diode. This IC here that I did say I thought was the power amplifier is the PA. You can see it's CP5405. This little IC down here is one of the MCUs for the ESC. These are FETs. So what you've got is our PA and a diode here, which is obviously, I think, providing power from the USB, and that is what is certainly generating a lot of the heat when the board is on USB. You do see a little bit on the video input chipset over here, but predominantly it's this little diode here that's causing it. Now, I have managed to get a few flights on this, not as much as I would like, but just to give you a view of how the camera looks first of all, I'll just take it out over the open field so you can see what it looks like. You can see how horrible it is here with the grey sky. In fact, it was actually raining on and off, but we pushed on through. What we have a look at now is how the lens performs. I'll just move it around a little bit just to show you what the lens effect is on the horizon so you can see what the fisheye is like. You can see the colours here on the camera, the detail as well. It's really hard for me to show you really out and out image quality style footage this time of year here in the UK, especially when we get the weather like we've got here. You can see that the image from the factory does come quite saturated. I have not touched any of the settings. This literally is as it comes. Overall, I think it looks okay. No complaints with regards to this at all. With regards to it flying around, this is on stock PIDs, stock settings. I haven't tuned this at all. I didn't get a chance to spend any time doing it. I simply took the board, placed it in a Mobula 6, and then took it for a few flights, moving it around the trees, just getting a feel for it, seeing how it looks. I speed up a bit later, taking it slow first of all, just so you can sort of see how much detail is in the image, because that's important here. It's understanding what benefit you get on digital compared to, say, analog in an aircraft of this size. Now, before I share with you my thoughts, there is a subject I just want to touch on that has been a bit of a raging subject with regards to this and other boards on my Discord server. And that is that this board is based on an existing target from Happy Model. It is the Crazy Bee target, and it is based on that with regards to the choice of MCU overall used, the choice of the way the Express LRS is set up, and that then has been sort of reworked by the guys over at HDZero to give us this board here today. However, what I've been told is that HDZero had not consulted either the ExpressLRS dev team or the Betaflight dev team with regards to this board, and as a result of that, it is using an existing target and it doesn't have its own target. That doesn't really change anything from my personal perspective. There are situations where manufacturers reuse targets all of the time, and there are situations where people ask for new targets. In recent times, we have seen a move from both ExpressLRS and Betaflight to have all new boards sort of certified by them before they're actually sold. That way they can help manufacturers pick up any issues before they make it into the public space. This board, though, has not been through that process. It's been entirely designed by HDZero, and they've done quite a lot of customization actually on this board just to get the package down to the size they have. For instance, it uses a smaller MCU than the standard choice, not using BGA because of the heat issues, and a few other changes. But what that does mean is that there is no specific target for this board. With regards to support, the target that it has was based on another one, and it isn't clear what effect that could have in the future. And what I've been told is the support for this board is going to have to come from HDZero. The developers have not seen this board. They've not tested this board. There are elements of this board that the developers don't really recommend anymore, the biggest of them being SPI-based ExpressLRS receiver. The dev team does not certify or at least endorse any new boards with SPI-based ExpressLRS receivers on board anymore. They've moved away from that, but that doesn't mean there isn't a place for it. And personally, I sit very much on the fence on this. If you have a design that works, I can 100% see why a manufacturer would simply want to continue making products based around that design without the need for contacting the dev teams involved. However, I also see from the dev team's perspective that from their point of view, as far as they're concerned, any issues with this, they're not going to be able to help on because they haven't seen the board for themselves. And things that used to be okay to do in their eyes, which is, say, an SPI-based ExpressLRS receiver, are not okay to do today. But with a board like this, there is always going to be a compromise. And I can really see why HDZero have done the things they've done, because that is the only way you're going to be able to get an AIO of this style and size with digital FPV built in. Now, before we get into my thoughts, it's time to talk about price. This board is going to be available for $99. That is the main AIO board on its own. Camera-wise, you've got the two choices. You've got the Eco camera at $29, or the Lux camera, the one you've seen in my footage here today. That is available for $45. There is also going to be a Mobula 6 with this board built in. There is the HD Bind and Fly version, which is going to be $189. And then there's a freestyle version of that, which is going to be $199, and they're both available from Happy Model as well, and I'll put a link to them in the description. Today you saw me flying it in my Mobula 6. This is my old analog one that I've torn apart. My old board for it is over here. I actually stripped that, so you can convert your own one if you want to, and what you'd be paying is the $99 plus, say, the $45 for the Lux camera, so $143 for the all-in-one board with the ExpressLRS with the digital FPV built in. Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on this board. Now, just to be clear before I do that, this is from my perspective as a frankly useless general FPV pilot. If you want the real lowdown on this from a Whoop perspective, make sure you check out the likes of Nick Burns, maybe Ciati and some others, the guys who are really into their Whoops. My overview is going to be more of a technical one. Theirs, though, will give you the real detail on this from a Whoop perspective. Now, I think this board is incredible. What HDZero have been able to do here, I never thought we'd see. To be able to get an all-in-one flight controller and HDFPV on a board of this size and weight is just insane. Carl is continuously pushing the envelope of how small and light he can make his system, and from that perspective, they should be congratulated simply for making this possible. Now, there are a few little quirks to this board. The heat is one of them, even when used on USB, and you do have that situation as I discussed with regards to the target. I don't think there's anything malicious there or anything that anyone should be worried about, but we do have a situation where you do get manufacturers making boards with existing targets. That doesn't really help when it comes to what the developers want. It is something I have highlighted to Carl and just asked why, and Carl simply said the target was available, that's what they based it on. I think it's probably something that needs a bit more communication between the dev teams, but there is a compromise here. For instance, ExpressRS don't support SPI-based ExpressRS receivers anymore, yet that would really be the only way to make this board. You cannot get an ESP32 on here. There literally is not a square millimeter of empty space that could be used for it. So you're always going to have this situation where manufacturers are going to do things that dev teams don't necessarily agree with, but that doesn't necessarily make it wrong either. Now, I am really looking forward to seeing how this board handles out in the real world, how people get on with it. You've got the new Modular 6 versions, the 2 versions, you've got the race and the freestyle. Really good to see as well. But if you want to convert your own aircraft, you can. That's what I've been doing here. I'm going to be talking, as I've said already, about $143 to convert your existing aircraft to full digital FPV. I think it looks good. Overall, I've personally got no major complaints. Now, if you're interested in getting one, there will be a link to it on the HDZero website in the description. I want to say a huge thank you to Carl at HDZero for sending this one over. That link will probably be an affiliate link, but if you don't want to use it, head over to HDZero anyway. And really, that's all there is from me on this one. If you have any comments or questions, put it down below as well, and I will try and answer it. Now, finally, I just want to say, if you'd like to support the channel to allow me to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking out links to my Patreon as well as buying me a coffee. It is only through the support of my patrons I'm able to keep making content on this channel. And if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content in the future, please do consider checking it out. I want to say a huge thank you to all of my patrons. We would not be able to do this without your support. Anyway, that's it from me on this one. Look after yourself, stay safe. I will speak to you soon.